Right, so while we wait for next Tuesday, where does this leave the president, the party, and most importantly, the country? I'm joined now by public policy specialist TK Pooe. TK, thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with the president and the position he's in at the moment. I was listening to an interview on eNCA this morning with Prof. Richard Calland, and he said, bizarrely, he believes that what has happened in the last 5 or 6 days has actually entrenched the president's position and made him more powerful, because what has happened is that the party has seen the potential dire consequences of him removing himself. We saw what happened to the RAND. Do you agree with Richard's assessment that this, in a weird sort of way, has kind of entrenched Ramaphosa's power?
Well, evening. Thanks for having me. Well, if by that he means he now looks like more of a normal ANC president, as in he looks like the previous guy, who also amassed power by ignoring, ethical and some might say legal judiciary, rules. Yes, Professor Calland is quite right that he now does look like the previous president. However, I think if we're being more serious, he actually looks weaker, because it has to be remembered, President Cyril Ramaphosa did not come into the presidency of the ANC by a huge amount of numbers. He only had one ticket, which was, listen, I'm here to reform and I want to be an ethical leader. Take that away, and then we can clearly say that, look, the king is kind of walking around a bit naked, and comments like your previous commentators are not actually helping the situation. In fact, they're making it worse, because they are actually taking away what he actually came on, what he came into the office with. And I think we really do need to interrogate more. If President Ramaphosa is not an ethical leader, what else does he really have to offer the country? Because by virtue of performance of the economy, employment, and other things, one can say he really has not done much.
What is your view on the report? And I think Richard Calland basing his views on his assessment of the report, that, and he obviously agrees with the president's push to review it, that they strayed from their mandate, that they misinterpreted what they were meant to do. What's your view on the report itself?
Well, I think it's actually a very well-written document for people who are not legal eagles. But I always say, look, I think people kind of read it the wrong way around. I know logic says you start from page 1, but the good page to actually start is chapter 9, which actually explains the terms of reference of the committee, why it was set up, what it looks for. And in it, they actually explain things which you kind of are hearing people speak about, but they don't really get into much detail about. The report clearly explains that, listen, this is the ambit which we were asked to speak about. These are the terms of reference Parliament adopted. And in Parliament adopting it, that's where the president should have said, oh, look, I'm not agreeing to X and Y. And I think there's a point which is not really coming out a lot with. The second half of the report, and if you actually read the terms of reference, says, listen, we give the president space to explain his perspective. Now, if you really want to look for fairness in any process, not even if it's a legal process, just a process of saying, listen, was I heard in the process? That was given to him. And I think the surprising thing, which I think we really do need to probably expand on, is the president is given space to say, listen, this is what's come out. What do you have to say? And the panel on the report says, listen, the more he spoke, the worse it actually seemed. It says, oh, look, you've been given a chance to, I know, Sally, you're quite familiar with the game Monopoly, to really use that get out of jail card. And he seems to have misused it and missed his turn. So I think the people who are really bashing the report always start from page 1, but they never read what were the terms of reference of the report, what was expected of it. And if you read the terms of reference and then read the totality of the report, it's logical, it's very sound, and you really don't get what the huff is about. Now, it doesn't mean the president doesn't have a right to go to it, but that's not really the issue. Because it's not a straightforward legal issue. This is an ethical leadership issue. And when you read the report in that context, look, the president going to the Constitutional Court actually makes things worse, because it says, listen, even on this, you seem not to understand what is happening. The fact that you really have put yourself into a situation where you should not have. But then again, if you look at, and I think it's something, again, which people really kind of miss with the president, it seems as though when it comes...
Sorry, I missed you there, yes? Can you still hear me?
No, apologies. It seems as... yes, I can. It seems that when it comes to matters of finance, our president is always found wanting. The people ask, President, can you release financial records about who sponsored you during your rise to the ANC presidency? He runs to the courts. And there's another case which, look, I'm not saying this is probably all his fault, but if you remember the issue of Glencore, how Glencore has been fined in the United States, we kind of forget that one of the executive members of Glencore was actually our president. So the issue really does then we have to ask ourselves properly to say, is it that this is the character of our president, that he seems to like hiding and obfuscating, or maybe the president's got a black cat running around his home, which just seems to always put him in these situations?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because I know that the report is very clear. It says we are dealing with two sets of hearsay because what the president has told us is also based on someone else's account because he wasn't on the farm. And the reality is there are holes. And whether those holes are because the president said I was following only the mandated questions I was asked, or because there are indeed holes and big questions to answer, hopefully when we get the Hawks investigation findings, we'll get to understand what exactly happened. And I hear what you're saying is that he could have easily sorted this out by just laying everything on the table. But let's focus on the party now. You know, Nelson Mandela is the only president in our democratic, only elected president who hasn't had scandal attached to his name. Obviously, I'm excluding Kgalema Motlanthe because he was only ever a temporary caretaker president for a few months. But the other three, including now Ramaphosa, have had scandal attached to their name. Do you see this as a symptom of the party that seems to lurch from crisis to crisis, that is deeply compromised? Or do you just think it's bad luck that three presidents have all had to deal with these scandals?
Look, I'd probably also exclude President Mbeki because I think his circumstance, probably you're right in saying it precipitated what has become a habit. And I always make use of another region in the ANC to say this is where they're going. If you look at the Northwest Province, I think they've only had one premier who's really served out his term, or actually got to a second term. So this really is become the way of the ANC in all regions of South Africa, where they've literally taken the eye off the ball. You know, it's called a bit of navel gazing, which is to say when you have nothing better to offer, you really start to look internally. And the question, you know, I always ask when it comes to President Ramaphosa and even the previous president to say, look, should we really be surprised that the ANC has got to this position? When this is a political party, when they canvass for people to come forward and to serve, which over the years has given them, you know, automatic ascension into government, they never ask the hard questions to say, what is your track record of leadership, ethical leadership? What is your track record of performance? What is your vision for this country? And I think we are at that point where we can really say, this is not a strong, we can really say, does the ANC actually love the Republic of South Africa? Or does the ANC seem to love the ANC's many dramas? And I think this is where we are. So for me, I'm not really surprised. I kind of think this is the way the ANC has been going for 2 decades, which is they love their own melodrama and they don't love what the Republic is or the idea of the Republic of South Africa, which is to say, listen, we got out of something near civil war. We really have the opportunity to be a unique exemplar on the continent and also in the southern hemisphere to really improve the lot of people, to address historical wrongs. And that idea just does not drive anyone who has sense to, with the exception of maybe President Mandela or even President Mbeki. So what we really have is a bunch of people who care about themselves and not the Republic.
So talking of the Republic, the most important factor is the country itself. What does all this mean for South Africa? Do you think this has caused lasting damage to our reputation? We have seen the rand recover, but do you think that there's lasting damage here?
I wouldn't say that because I think as South Africans, we're all in a bit of the psychosis of the ANC. We've all been damaged, whether you love or hate the ANC. We've all been damaged by the ANC. But I think what's interesting to actually look at this drama is look at it through the eyes of the international community. Earlier today, we heard about the Sky report. If you look at your other international broadcasters, it's amazing when they report the story, how much harder it hits. I think maybe we've kind of got inoculated by the fact that we know the ANC is messed up and we know government doesn't perform. But when you see it from an international lens, it really just lends credence to the fact that we have so fallen down as a country that, look, it's not a secret, it's not wrong now to simply say we're just like any other, you know, let's say African countries in the 90s and 80s, because other African countries have made progress and they're actually getting better at governance. If you look at what's happening in East Africa and also other areas, it seems as though we are going back into the 90s of simply saying we're becoming a pariah. And I think that is probably the most painful thing, that there is nothing at the moment we can really cling on to say what's going to make South Africa a bit better. I'm not that downcast because I always think that there are good people in the Republic of South Africa who are just willing. It's just that the political environment and maybe that should be the debate, that the political environment, which also includes opposition parties, just never allows the best and brightest among us to actually ascend to power. And that's what we should be fixated about. And I think once we start asking the right questions, start looking at the right things, then I think the right people are going to come along. So I don't want people saying I'm being overly pessimistic. When it comes to the ANC, I think they're writing themselves into the history books. But for the rest of us, it maybe gives us an opportunity to say, we know we want better. What does better look like?
Important issues to think about. Thank you so much for chatting to us this evening. Public policy specialist TK Pooe there. Now let's